Hey, what is going on, guys? Max Settings here, and welcome back to another review. In today's review, we are going to be taking a look at three portable DAC amps from Ifi, being the Nano iDSD Black Label, the xDSD, and the Micro iDSD Black Label. Now, before we hop into today's review, just a quick disclaimer. The Nano I personally own, and the xDSD and the Micro were provided for review by Ifi, so big thanks to them for sending these out for review. But today we are going to be giving a little overview of these three portable amps. Now, I do just want to say before we start out that I do not have a lot of experience with testing portable amps, so I am not going to be able to compare these to other portable amps of the price bracket. So if you're looking for that, you can go ahead and click away now. But I am going to be giving an overview of these three units and what I think about how they sound. But if you're looking for a comparison to like the Monolith THX Portable or the FIO Q5 or something like that, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to give you that opinion. But without further ado, let's hop on into this review. So starting things off with the Nano here, this is a $200 DAC amp combo unit. And it has 285 milliwatts at 30 ohms and 20 milliwatts at 600 ohms. Now, it is all black, it is metal, it is quite thick. It's not just perfectly square, it has a little bit of a curvature or little angles to the top. On the front, you have a IE match output, a direct output, your indicator LED, your volume knob power switch combo. On the back, you have a 3.5mm line output, a switch that lets you switch filters between measure and listen, which you can read about what that does. We're not going to go over that for the sake of time. And you have your only input, which is a USB male input, so you have to use a male to female cable, which is included, or an OTG cable like this USB-C to USB female cable. Now, moving back onto the front, the IE match output is used for very sensitive IEMs because the direct output doesn't have the lowest noise floor in the world. So with sensitive IEMs, you will get some hissing, so you have to use IE match. Now, the only problem with the IE match is that it is quite a bit weaker than the direct output, and it also has a 4 ohm output impedance, which can throw off the frequency response of some sensitive IEMs like the Campfire Andromeda, for example. So not a huge fan of the IE match on the Nano here. Now, the LED does a few things. It changes white when it has a source. It can also change depending on your bit rate. Blue is charging. Green is like searching for source. Magenta is MQA because this does decode MQA. As you can see on the bottom here, it has MQA certification. And then you have your volume knob, as already mentioned. So that is the Nano Black Label. Now, moving on, next up is the xDSD. Now, this thing is $400. You have an output power of 500 milliwatts at 16 ohms, 270 milliwatts at 50 ohms, 48 milliwatts at 300 ohms, and 24 milliwatts at 600 ohms. Now, this thing looks a lot like a whiskey flask. It is a very similar sort of shape. It also is a shiny, reflective mirror finish, which gets quite smudged up and dirty looking with fingerprints, as you probably can tell. And on the back bit is plastic, which I'll go over why that is in just a second. Now, on the front, you have 3.5mm output, 2 indicator LEDs for bit rate and input, your volume knob, which we will go over also in a second, 2 more LEDs for your 3D soundstage boost and bass boost, which for those of you that saw my review of the iCan Pro, you will know what that does. And you also have a settings Bluetooth button, which also turns on and off the 3D and bass boost settings. On the back, you have a SPDIF input. So you can input either micro coaxial or get an adapter to coaxial digital. You have the same USB input as the Nano has, the same measure listen switch for the filters. And you have a USB-C to charge, which is unique to the xDSD. Both the Micro and the Nano charge over this USB, but the xDSD charges over Type-C. Now the reason why this has a plastic back is because this has aptX HD, which you can connect to this via Bluetooth, so you have to have a plastic back to give it some better range because Bluetooth does not go very far through metal. So if you have a device that can output aptX HD, you can use that, or just standard Bluetooth, but it's not going to be as high quality. And then on the front here, if we turn it on, you will see that the volume knob has colors, and the colors is an indication of the percentage volume that you were at. So it's very much like a cord product in that sense, where the volume knob changes colors, which I guess makes sense because both IFI and cord are both from the UK. So I guess they both kind of shared that idea. You can see it cycling through the colors as you turn up the volume here. And that is your overview of the xDSD. Let's turn it off for now, and we will move on into the Micro. Okay, so now moving on into the Micro. So this thing is quite the unit, both figuratively and literally. Calling it a portable is a bit of a stretch because it is quite large. I've seen desktop amps that are smaller than this thing. And it has a lot of features to go over. And this is probably the most famous of the three. A lot of people know the Ifi Micro. And for good reason, it does some very interesting things. So starting off, on the front, you will see a 1/4-inch output. Not too many portable devices with a full 1/4-inch output, so that is quite nice in some ways. You have the bass boost switch, which lets you boost your bass slightly. You have the soundstage boost switch, which tries to emulate speakers by making the soundstage a little wider. You have the same volume knob that the Nano had, where it just clicks on. But on this one, your indicator LED is right there on top. Now moving on into the bottom, and you have a couple switches as well as on the sides. So the ones on the side, you have the red switch is your power mode. You have Eco, Normal, and Turbo. More on what those do in a second. You have the polarity, so you can reverse the polarity if you would want to for some reason. You have filters, you have standard, minimum phase, and bit perfect filters that you can pick from. Here you have the IE match settings, so you can turn on IE match. You have high or off high sensitivity and ultra sensitivity. On the back here, you have a switch that lets you change the RCA outputs from fixed out, so if you just want to use this as a DAC out, to variable out if you want to use it as a preamp. So that's nice. Moving on to the back, you have coaxial digital input, RCAs that can be fixed or lined out as previously mentioned, the same USB input, and you also have a female USB on the side where you can use this as a battery bank because it is quite large. And you can use it to charge your phone or your player or something, so that's kind of neat. And also 3.5mm input on the front, if I didn't previously mention that. So you have a couple different input options, 3 with this one, but 1 output option, and quite a lot of features. Now the big party trick with the Micro is without a doubt its output power. It is one of the most powerful portable devices out there in terms of headphone amps. So this thing does 4 watts at 16 ohms in its turbo mode. You get 1.9 watts at 16 in normal and 250 milliwatts at 16 ohms. So this thing in turbo mode is quite powerful, so that is quite neat with this particular unit. Now moving on into the sound segment, for my testing I did quite a bit with a bunch of different scenarios. The 3 headphones used for testing were my painted pair of Sennheiser HD800, because this is my choice headphone for testing source gear, because quite source revealing. Since these are all portable amps, I actually whipped out something I have in for review right now, which is the Dan Clark Audio Aeon 2. He is really pushing these as a portable headphone, so I figured let's try them on the portable amp, since that might be a possible setup for people. Review of these coming shortly, so stay tuned for that. I tried them on just the computer with the included USB cable. I ran them OTG to my FIO M6 over the little OTG cable here. For IEMs, I just used the Tin Audio T4. Review of these also coming soon. And on the Micro, I also tried running a DAC in, since this one can take an analog input. It's the only one of the three that can. The xDSD, I tried the Bluetooth on the M6. Works great, sounds pretty good. His aptX. And I also tried using all three of them as a DAC out. So now on to the results of my testing. So starting off with the one I own, which is the Nano Black Label. All in all, I'm not a big fan of how this sounds, even though I own it. So you can definitely tell I'm not being biased just because I own it. It doesn't sound that great. It's pretty muddy sounding, somewhat glary, lacking in detail, kind of compressed. And I'm not sure if it's the DAC or the amp portion. Probably more so the amp, but there's no way to tell because I can't input an external DAC to this anyway. So not a massive fan of how this sounds. I'm going to imagine there's probably better sounding portable amps for this kind of money. But not too much I can say good in terms of the sound. It's decently powerful, but for like more moderately hard to drive headphones like an HD6XX or something like that, I'm taking it to here, but I do listen on the louder side, so quiet listeners, you shouldn't have too much problem. But anything harder than like an HD6XX or so is probably about the limit of what you're going to want to do on this unit, but not a huge fan of how this particular one sounds. Now, I'm actually going to skip over the xDSD for a second and move on to the Micro. Now, the Micro is the one that I spent the most time with. Because this is the one that gets all the hype because of all the features, the power, and it indeed has the power. I powered LCD4 off this at like half volume, and I really like it just to have something that I can stick in my backpack and I know can power just basically every headphone shy of like the HE6. So it is quite neat in that regard, and I used it a lot. I used it in bed. I took it to my friend's house a couple times to show him some stuff. So yeah, it's definitely very cool. I've charged my phone off of it. I like all the features. And before I did my AVC testing, I definitely thought that this was going to be the one that would take the lead. But this is why we do testing, and in fact, that was not the case. Believe it or not, the xDSD in my testing took the cake for the best sounding of the three. And I will admit, this is the one that I've spent the least time with, which I don't know why, because it actually has quite a few features also. It has the wireless and the bass boost and stuff. But this one is also lacking in power. It's around as powerful as the Nano is. And I use this one at like 90% on plus on most headphones and like 75% on most IEMs. But all in all, the xDSD sounds the best to me. The Micro does not sound much different than the Nano. It is a little bit better, but it still is somewhat grainy with a lot of mud. The DAC sounds glary the same way that the Nano DAC also sounds glary. And I'm also not a massive fan of how this sounds after comparing it to the xDSD. The xDSD does not sound nearly as muddy. It doesn't sound as compressed. It has better dynamics, better detail all in all, and everything just sounds much cleaner, less hazy, with better dynamics, better detail. And that really surprised me. I was definitely expecting this thing to take the cake, but all in all, these two don't sound too much different, which really surprised me. Now, I thought maybe, okay, well, maybe this one has a much worse DAC than the xDSD, because the xDSD is certainly newer. So I ran my Grace Design SDAC balanced into the 3.5mm input to bypass the DAC. And there was a slight improvement from the internal DAC, but still was not competing with the xDSD off of its own DAC. So that is definitely an amp limitation of the Micro here, which is not really a surprise because a lot of times these amps that are like very, very powerful are sacrificing sound quality for power, which is what I basically said about the iCan Pro. And I know a lot of people have that opinion of the shit Lear. There's also another one that's like somewhat unnecessarily powerful. Some people like how the Lear sounds, some don't. But I think that's also what's happening here with the Micro. Now also do note that none of these sound as good as modern $200, I'd say, stacks like the Magni 3 Plus Modi 3 stack, or like the JDS Atom and Grace S stack, like these popular $200 stack options. Maybe 2 years ago, the like Nano or whatever could have competed with like the V2 shit stack, where if you had less powerful headphones, you could, you know, use this as like a all-in-one solutions, like a grab and go, or if you needed more power, maybe you could get like a Magni later and DAC out to it or something. But in the modern era with the current $200 stack options, none of these are really competing with any of those. The DAC outputs of all of them, I don't think competes with good $100 DACs either. The xDSD is the best of the three for DAC outs, but it's still not as good as, say, a Modi 3 or something along those lines. So at the end of the day, the Nano is not going to be getting my recommendation. I'm not 100% sure what you would buy over it, but I'm not a huge fan of how this sounds. The xDSD, I don't know if there's better options out there for $400. There probably is, but if you're going to buy one of the three, this is the one to buy. It sounds pretty decent. It has the bass boost and the soundstage boost, which is fun. The aptX Bluetooth, which is also nice to have. Charges over USB-C because people like USB-C. Optical input. The best size of the three, this one's actually portable. It's not as thick. It has a good form factor, but it does get smudged up. So of the three, if you're going to buy one, this is probably the one to buy. Now, the Micro, I think, does have its place. As I mentioned, this is in a very similar situation to the iCan Pro. Now, if you remember from my review, that I called that the Swiss Army amp, and it was one of those ones where you could do anything, but for the money, it didn't sound tremendously great. And this is another one of those. This is if you want something that you know can drive anything on the go with basically all the features you would want, but you are willing to sacrifice some sound quality for that. This is very much something like the iCan Pro was, very similar kind of thing. So this definitely probably still does have a place and a use case, and there are people that are going to want it. And I also do still kind of want to own one of these because it's nice in some ways, but for $600, definitely not up to par for $600 in terms of sound. So all in all, xDSD is the one of the three in terms of the best sound quality, at least in my opinion. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of the three Ifi portable amps. Links of where to buy these in the description below. Once again, big thanks to Ifi for supplying these two for review. Check the description for my Twitter and my contact email and all other relevant information. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.